like to talk about our being lonely, our suffering from loneliness when we do. And I think a lot of people in our society are suffering from loneliness. So the first fact about loneliness might be to be aware of the fact that you are not alone in your loneliness. The society itself, in its corporate and competitive rules, very often seems to build in a source of loneliness, if you will, as people distrust one another or are competing with one another and feel that one another is a potential threat to them. There's a sense of being alone generally in our society as so many people are moving around trying to be number one. In fact, in our dancing, our social dancing, much of that social dancing, if you notice, there may be a lot of people in the room dancing, but they're all dancing alone. I've found in doing therapy that marital infidelity usually flows out of a sense of loneliness. It doesn't flow out of a need for sex so much as a desire on the part of one or the other to find an intimacy that is lacking in the marriage. Many of our adolescents who succumb to peer pressure to be one of the crowd in a way that might be very negative for their well-being now and in the future are succumbing to loneliness and to what they think is a way of overcoming it by doing what the crowd wants them to do. Marilyn Monroe is a good example of a person who was, if we may use the term, adored by millions, and yet was essentially suffering from intense loneliness. It's useful for us to distinguish between being alone and being lonely. All of us have a need to be alone from time to time. To be alone in that way is to be by ourselves in quiet so that we can integrate the experiences of our past or of today or of this week so that we can sort out our feelings, so that we can determine where we are and what we want. That's the reason some people go on spiritual retreats and other people, if you will, go on secular ones, go down to the beach or whatever and just want to be alone for a while to mull things over. To be alone in that way is a creative act, is a means of restoring our energies. I really can't give you the benefit of a book I don't take the time to read, which requires my being alone perhaps to read it, or to have a new thought to share with you. I have to be alone. But loneliness is a sense of being cut off from others, of being apart and separate from others when we don't want to be. We are indeed social animals, as Aristotle pointed out, and we do want intimate friends or marriage partners with which to share our lives. And we may want these things and yet find that essentially we're lonely and suffering from loneliness, such as 3 clients I can mention to you who seem to me rather typical of examples of loneliness in our time. One was a middle-aged gentleman we'll call Jim, who was very successful as an administrator in an institution, but when he came to me, it was because he was dissatisfied in his life. He was all alone. He had no close friends. He had never married. He found it very difficult to meet people. He found he was overweight because one of the things he did was to stuff himself to try to fill that empty space he felt there. He was very self-conscious about his weight. He was also he felt that he was not an interesting person. He said that in his very first meeting with me. He wasn't sure I'd accept him as a client because he heard I only accepted interesting people. And he said, you may not want me, I'm just a bore. And then there was Sally, who came to me as a result of having expressed a suicidal thought to a supervisor of hers at work. Sally had no close friends. She had come from a large family, and she felt all alone there, lost in the crowd. Her parents had been rather abusive to all of the children, and she didn't feel any cohesiveness in the family. She had entered one abusive relationship with a man. It lasted for some time, but having gotten out of it, she preferred staying clear of men. She found other women better looking, prettier, sexier than herself, and so she had no close friends there. She felt they wouldn't be interested in being friends with her. She felt she was so plain. She had really given up on social life, with one exception. She belonged to a softball team. On the other hand, the softball team, after the game, would go to a coffee shop, and it turned out she would say nothing. She would contribute nothing to the conversation on the grounds that she felt she had nothing to contribute. They wouldn't be interested in her remarks. They might laugh, although she had never tried it. Judy she was in her 20s, had one marriage and 3 relationships with men, and all of them had ended disastrously. Judy didn't like being alone, but she contended men failed her all the time and didn't live up to her expectations. And she wondered not only what was wrong with the men, but what was wrong with me, is the way she put it. What's wrong with me that I can't pick the right kind of men? She had no trouble meeting people. I think they ran away from her neediness, from her grasping at them, because she really felt she needed somebody in her life rather than merely wanted somebody. These 3 people, I think, are typical. You may recognize yourself in one or more of the aspects of their ways in which they were creating their loneliness. I know that years ago that was a way, there were some things in there that were ways in which I created my loneliness. How do we start to turn around? Well, one, I think it's a paradoxical thing. We have to quit looking for someone to make us feel whole. The moment we quit looking out there for someone else to complete us and make us a whole person, when we begin to really accept the fact that we are whole in ourselves, that we're all here, that I'm all here, then we have made a beginning to intimacy. You see, some people, especially in terms of marriage, think in terms of the other half myth. You know, well, my better half is at home, or this is my other half. As if I'm not a complete person without somebody else to whom I'm married or somebody with whom I'm sharing my life. The fact is that I am a complete person, and intimacy takes place between whole persons, not between half people. Intimacy takes place when we have a healthy person, someone who feels good in their own skins, someone who understands that they're in this relationship because they want to be in it, not because they are needy for somebody else to affirm them and to make them whole, but rather because they are themselves grateful for the other person being in their life. They want to share with this other person. They want these things, but they don't need them. I remember when I proposed to my late wife some quarter century ago, and I said, I need you. And she looked me right in the eye and said, I don't need you. I love you madly, passionately. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to have children with you, but I don't need you. If you died tomorrow, I would live successfully. What she was saying was she had a mature attitude towards intimacy and the choice of a partner. Well, how do you begin to get that attitude? Well, one of the ways in which I help my clients do so is I stand them in front of a mirror. I very often do this with clients. I stand them in front of a mirror and I say, would you look in this mirror? And I want you only to tell me the good things you see in this mirror. I have had beautiful women cry as they looked in that mirror and say, I never see anything good in the mirror. Part of the reason being that American women are trained from the time they're this high only to look for zits when they're looking in a mirror. I've had Jim, for example, the man I mentioned earlier, looked in that mirror beside me and said he couldn't see anything good. He only looked in the mirror when he was shaving. For one thing, he was ashamed of his body. My attempt there is to get them to begin to see that the image they see in the mirror is the image that they perceive other people as seeing. And the moment they begin to see good things there, they will begin to have a better self-image. And I don't allow them to see negative things. So one of the exercises I very often give my clients who complain of loneliness is that at home they are before or after the bath, when they're nude, or when they're fully clothed before going out for an evening or before going to work, they're to spend a moment or two in front of the mirror and see only the good things and affirm only the good things they see there so that their self-image is enhanced thereby. The second aspect of this is to take a look at our self-esteem, our quotient of good feelings about ourselves. There's a sense in which we have need to affirm ourselves. And that affirmation of self comes out of a realization that we are, each of us, absolutely unique and never to be duplicated. Each one of us is beautiful because we're one of a kind. Now, some of us weren't taught that. We were taught that we were a naughty little boy or whatever, whether by parents or teachers or whatever. We had blows to our self-esteem. It becomes very necessary to restore that self-esteem. The people who entered disastrous relationships, like Judy, who continued to enter them because they felt they needed somebody else to make themselves whole, were lacking in self-esteem. They weren't complete in themselves, didn't feel good about being who they were. Well, how do we begin that? Well, one of those things is I very often have my clients tell me all of the good things about them. What would make them a wonderful person to know? Well, this is very embarrassing for them. They feel very shy about it, and I have to encourage them, to put courage into them, to begin to say what they have to offer other people. Because other people accept us at our own valuation. And it's by my telling myself I have nothing to offer anyone else that I keep myself lonely. It's when I affirm that I have something to bring to other people that I try to give, that I try to give them that gift of myself that way. How do I know what I have to offer? Well, there are other ways of going about this too. One is when people compliment us. How do you behave when somebody compliments you? Do you turn around and say to yourself, he's just saying that, or she's just saying that? I wonder what he wants. I wonder what she wants. Do you say, they're just being nice, or I could have done better and shunt it aside? We call those things discounting or deleting compliments. Some people don't even hear a compliment when it comes. The other thing I'd like to recommend strongly is that you begin not only to hear those compliments, but to repeat them to yourself during the day so that you can allow them to nurture that desert in there, to put water on it, and maybe a few flowers will bloom. But furthermore, there's the necessity to not only hear those compliments from others, but to begin to compliment yourself. It's the most common thing in the world for somebody to do 50 things right between breakfast and getting to the office. 50. They tie their shoes, brush their teeth, comb their hair, make their breakfast, drive down there in beautiful fashion, do 50 things right, and then accidentally spill the coffee on their, as they're bringing it from the coffee machine to the desk, accidentally knock it over and say, I never do anything right. This maximizing of something that goes wrong and the minimalizing of all the things one does right is one of the ways we keep our self-esteem low. So it's really crucial for you to begin to compliment yourself when you do things right. And I mean things right like tying your shoes right. There are a couple of million people who'd love to be able to tie their shoes as well as you do. Very simple things as well as larger things. I do this right. I drove to work beautifully this morning. I did this right. I'm a courteous driver. Whatever it is, and allow those things to come in so that you begin to like yourself and to appreciate all the good things you're doing. Because others very often accept us at our own valuation of ourselves. And if we have harsh judgments on ourselves, then what happens is we expect others to judge us harshly, so we stay away from them. We're creating our loneliness. But if we begin to appreciate the things we do right, we gain not only self-esteem, but we gain self-confidence. Now, Jim felt he had nothing to offer to others. Here he was, an administrator who had a staff and everything else, but yet on the social life he felt other people would find him boring, fat, uninteresting. He went to numerous conferences in his field. I advised him at the very next conference he had to go to take the risk of going up to some people he thought looked interesting to him, that he found attractive, to go up to them and say, what did you think of that speaker? Or I thought that speech was pretty good. Or where did you come from? And how do you like the conference so far? And to speak to them. He came back from that experience telling me that he was amazed because people found his comments interesting and carried on conversations with him. Sally began to take the risk of offering some comments to the softball team at that coffee clutch that they had after every game, and was stunned to discover that people enjoyed her comments, that she had some contribution to make, that nobody just shame on you or chased her out of the circle. She began to gain more and more confidence socially. I had strongly urged Judy to hold off from men and any serious relationships with them for a while, if she could do so, while she worked on herself. And the reason I did that was Judy was so hungrily looking out there for her fulfillment, for somebody to be intimate with, that she constantly made these mistakes about people and also drove them off with her grasping neediness for what she considered intimacy and romance to be. Now, how do you go about nurturing yourself in separation from other people for a while in order to gain that strength? Well, one of the things I'd advised her to do was to get active in her church. Not to meet others, but to do something for other people. Not to get from them, but to give. And the same thing could go for volunteer work, things that make you feel good and that you can put your talents to use for other people. In that giving, you see, in that loving of others in that way, which is what's really involved, then what happens is it makes you a more loving person, and people are always attracted to loving persons. In the first place, if you're lonely, if you're suffering from loneliness, very often it means you have time on your hands, especially if you're single. You very often have time on your hands. I would strongly advise that it be used to enrich yourself. Judy took up the piano, for instance, something she had always wanted to do. She began to enjoy playing piano. She began to enjoy times alone when she could practice on the piano, and she found she was having more fun. It made her a more fun person to be with. Jim went into a dieting program and also joined a bowling team at the same time, which put him not only into an exercise situation, but also into one where he was meeting other people. Those are just two suggestions. What would you do to your apartment if a special guest were coming by this weekend, or for an overnight visit, or for a day, or for a dinner? What would you do to prettify it, to make it more beautiful, to make it more comfortable? Well, why not do it for yourself? You're a very special person. I think it's crucial to understand that. I very often, with my clients who are suffering from loneliness, have to urge them to be kind to yourself this week. I want you to do at least 2 good things for yourself this week, big good things. You know, treat yourself to a new dress, or treat yourself to a play. And at least do 1 good thing for yourself each day, because you are a worthwhile person and you're worth those good things. At the same time, I encourage all of us to develop our underdeveloped sides. What do I mean by that? Well, some people are very athletic and outdoorsy and they do all of these things, but they haven't read a book in months or gone to a ballet. And it's useful for us to go and do that other thing. In doing so, what happens is we enrich ourselves, and we also expand our awareness of the world, make ourselves more interesting. Similarly, those who might be very sedentary and read a lot and hide out a lot, I encourage to go out and, as with Jim, join a bowling team. That development of our underdeveloped sides makes us a more interesting person to other people. I've advised people to go and do a short-term class in wok cookery, for example, because that's what they want to learn. You know, something that they're interested in learning, and have always said, just like Judy in the piano lessons, I've always wanted to do that. I say, go do it. And because you go to a wok cooking class, let's say it's going to be a 6-session class, and you go to that to learn how to cook woks, or whatever they do at a wok cooking class. And if you meet somebody there, you have something to talk about, which is wok cookery. On the other hand, if you don't meet anyone there that's interesting, then you have learned a new thing that makes you that much richer a person. You are somebody who knows how to use a wok in cooking. Okay? And one more clue about self-consciousness in this regard. To overcome self-consciousness, I find the major ingredient to be other-conscious. Dale Carnegie, years ago when I was a child, and his courses are still around, wrote a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And there was one basic theorem, if you will, one basic premise to that entire course that is still around. And people spend hundreds of dollars to learn how to do it. And that is that people are interested in you if you're interested in them. And so Dale Carnegie taught people to take the risk of expressing an interest in somebody else, of complimenting somebody else, and to watch the feedback that came back. Sally, for example, invited her softball team for dinner for an evening at the end of the season. Had a wonderful time. Jim had a dinner at his home, the first dinner he'd ever had in his home, for some members of his staff. They had a wonderful time, and he got all kinds of positive feedback. Where are these people today? Well, Sally, who terminated her therapy with me about 3 years ago, is married now, and recently I got a card announcing her first baby. Jim left therapy about 6 months ago. He dropped off some books a couple of weeks back, books I had loaned him. I wasn't in. He told my secretary that he's lost 50 pounds. He wanted me to know that. He had left his job and was going back to school for an advanced degree and was dating. Judy's now involved in a political campaign. She's meeting interesting people, and she's not rushing into, this is a quote from her, "I'm not rushing into any relationships until I meet a guy I want to spend the rest of my life with." I think that's a remarkable statement. In other words, they've all grown more whole, more self-confident by taking some single and in some ways simple first steps, some risks. And in taking those risks and in beginning to realize that you are adequate as you are, that you are a complete human being, and to come into relationships with others out of your wholeness and what the gifts you have to offer by being a more interesting person to others, by being interested in others, by loving others, you find they love you back. And then you find you have that intimacy which you seek, which is not an intimacy out of neediness, but an intimacy out of wanting to be there. A whole person involved with another whole person and sharing on a level of self-revelation. That's the intimacy with which we seek. And I think that if you elect to risk some of the things I've suggested, you may find your life enhanced. I surely pray it's so, and I thank you for being with me.